Every time I talk about school threats or bomb threats happening in our schools, every question remains the same. What's the solution to dealing with this? Like I've always said, we need to talk to our kids. Tell our kids this is not okay. Monitor what our children post on social media. And charge and hold parents accountable and responsible by charging them. It's exactly what happened. Take a look at these 4 stories.
Yeah, we've been here for some hours now. Now, around 7 or 8 this morning is when we saw a lot of parents driving up with their children in the backseat ready for school. No school officials were outside, so they were wondering just what was going on. Before finding out that all Kenner Discovery schools are closed today. The newest threats come just hours after the school's 4th bomb threat of the year was made just yesterday. School officials say weeks ago, Kenner Police Department arrested 2 13-year-olds in connection with the threats. According to the school, one of the 2 teens has since been bonded out. The schools were closed today out of an abundance of caution. Parents tell me they received the email just before 7 this morning about the threats in school closures, but many didn't see it and showed up to school, including Jose. He says he has to go to work, a huge inconvenience, but he's very concerned for his kids' safety.
Nobody told me nothing. I go to work now, I wake up in the morning, I go to the school, but now I go home with my child, I'm looking for somebody to take care.
And Kenner Police Department says they are investigating the situation, including whether or not the 13-year-old recently bonded out has anything to do with the most recent threats. And of course, WDSU will continue to keep you updated. Reporting from Kenner,
So how can a 13-year-old get out of jail and still do this? Be bonded out. You should have been monitored. You should have been on probation. That should never have happened. Now a student will transfer after receiving those threats, reporting a gun being seen. I mean, how can a 13-year-old be bonded and still make threats? When you're released from jail, you will never do this again. That's why we have parole or probation. I mean, I wouldn't expect as a 13-year-old to be released from prison and still continue doing this again. No. We have what's called probation. Probation just basically means a probation officer will monitor you. You violate your probation, you go back to jail. Take a look at this.
Well, we're getting an update now from the school district about the father's request to move his daughter to a new school. Ericketta Cost has the latest from outside the district office with more. Ericketta.
Good evening, and as you mentioned, we are going to preface this story with an update from the district just moments ago saying this student will be transferred moving forward. We spoke with the father again. This student attends Dr. Alice Holloway Young Middle School. The father says she did the right thing. She reported a gun on grounds, but he says it's unfair. She has to pay for it with threats.
There's going to become times where you might have to go against what you think is the code of the streets.
Victor Saunders is advisor to the mayor's violence prevention programs and says tips are incredibly important, but many are fearful to come forward, concerned people will figure out it was them who reported.
Basically, what we try and do is give people a level of comfort and being able to make that decision, because it is a very important decision, and it's one that you have to take the entire family into consideration.
He says when threats like this happen, it's typically over social media, but he says no one should ever feel unsafe under any circumstances. And if they do, he says to call them.
Although we don't readily divulge information and things of that nature, we try and make sure if that's a decision that they have made, that we try and assist them in being as safe as possible.
Saunders says crews from Pathways to Peace are stationed throughout the district. in buildings, creating relationships with students, building trust, and mediating tensions. The city has plans to add even more soon. In the meantime, Father Daniel Greathouse says he's working to get his student transferred elsewhere and is concerned the district isn't moving fast enough.
It kind of crushes you when you think people your friends and stuff like that, and they turn on you because you know how middle school and high school kids can be.
Again, update from the district just moments ago. They are going to be transferring the student as soon as possible. You can report tips anonymously no matter where you live, your age. Be sure to reach out to 911 or the mayor's office directly. For now in Rochester, Erica DeCoste, News 8.
Thank you, Erica. I know that father in that family is breathing a sigh of relief tonight. You can call the City Crisis Hotline at 314-8666.
And you know there's an old saying. There's an old saying that snitches get stitches. Snitches get stitches? There's an old saying, snitches get stitches and end up in ditches. That's what they're saying. If you're a snitch, you get threatened. Tattling is not bullying. I mean, if you report this, you should be a hero. You should be a hero. You should be one of the heroes out there reporting this to the mayor's office or to the police. That's not snitching. That's doing something right. That is doing something right. That's not just, I don't know how to say it, but if you report this, you could become a symbol of you can become a symbol. Become a very good symbol. Coming up on Friday, there's a school threat finance ordinance that would help hold parents responsible, and statewide school threats are a hoax. Those two come up on Friday. Coming up next, James Serville is in prison. Now he's going to court for planning to blow up Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Will he be found guilty or not guilty? It's in the hands of the jury. And then later, a father goes to court for shooting the neighbor's dog. Who was on trial here? Animal control or the neighbor? Stay with us. Monday, I brought you the story of James Serville, who was in prison for blowing up a school. And during the jail time, he met a man named Thomas Morgan, who laughed and joked about killing Sheriff Joe Arpaio. But there's a twist to this. There were audio recordings and videotapes that would help out the case. And a guy named Yancey, who was really undercover cop, helped out about buying the bomb parts. But after all of that, after buying either the first or the last bomb part, he was arrested and charged with trying to blow up Joe Arpaio. Or conspiracy, whatever. So the question is, will he be found guilty or not guilty? Here's Josh Mango to the conclusion to The Plot Thickens.
Were you nervous during the trial?
I was kind of happy because for the whole time I was in there, I was determined to go to trial.
James Serville had been in jail 4 years, awaiting trial for allegedly conspiring to murder one of Arizona's most popular elected officials, Sheriff Joe Arpaio. He'd been caught on tape building a bomb intended for the sheriff, but he claimed he'd been entrapped, coerced into committing the crime by a jailhouse informant and by the sheriff's department itself. The sheriff's lawyer, Jack McIntyre, thought Servile's entrapment claim was patently bogus.
It was a creation that was made strictly for the point of view of presenting it to a jury and seeing if they'll bite on that hook.
In a pretrial deposition, the informant, Thomas Morgan, said the murder plot was all Servile's idea, that he, Morgan, did not exaggerate it to win favors, nor did the detectives tell him to do it.
At no time did they tell me to entrap this kid. At no time did they tell me to entice this kid.
Now a jury would decide whether Morgan was lying or whether Serville was. The trial took 5 weeks. Jurors heard tape after scratchy tape. They heard sheriff's detectives seeming to instruct their informant to play up the threat on Sheriff Joe.
Well, not too many people know the prosecutor. He's not well known. Everybody knows Arpaio.
They heard Morgan chat up Serville about killing Sheriff Joe. They heard sheriff's detectives proposing to set Seville up with a friend on the outside. Supposed hitman who was really an undercover detective.
And he might be able to make it worth your while to, maybe make something for him, to make a bomb, something like that.
On the other hand, they also heard Jimmy Seville crowing about his bomb-making skills.
I'm a real pyro, but I do like blowing things up. It's about time I get paid for it.
Seville's defense got some unexpected help from informant Thomas Morgan, who had made a surprising statement to prison officials shortly after Seville's arrest. Quote, Morgan started talking about how Seville was entrapped, states Seville was set up by the sheriff's department. In his sworn deposition, Thomas Morgan performed another wild about-face, claiming that he was just playing yet another angle for better treatment behind bars.
My statement was to this effect: if you don't get somebody down here to do something with me, then I'm going to turn this whole thing around and make it seem like an entrapment case.
Who do you trust? Morgan, the convicted con man and veteran informant who claimed he was just doing his civic duty? Or Seville, the convicted would-be arsonist, accused would-be assassin who claimed he was coerced into building a bomb? Or maybe Wayne Scoville, the sheriff's sergeant who had called Seville's lawyer with his doubts about the investigation.
It's the worst case I've ever seen. It's a complete entrapment. The informant really ran the show.
The case went to the jury on June 12, 2003. Seville's lawyer, Ulysses Farragut, was nervous.
I had a very good sense that we presented the case well, but you never know what a jury's going to do.
Working very hard.
Jury foreperson Fausta Woody and juror Darla Wright said Thomas Morgan's testimony actually hurt the prosecution. Thomas Morgan sort of cast himself as a good citizen.
He did.
You think Thomas Morgan was a good citizen?
No.
They were surprised to find James Seville credible.
He was very open and honest about the entire thing. They could not catch him in one single lie.
And Detective Scoville was the icing on the cake.
When he said this kid was entrapped from the beginning, that was the end of the case.
Jimmy Seville had been in jail for 4 years. Friday the 13th turned out to be his lucky day.
We, the jury, do find the defendant not guilty of count 1.
And they read the verdict and they say not guilty. And you realize that's it? You get out of jail, it's the end?
I was too happy to realize anything.
His mom, Rebecca, who believed in him all those years.
It was the best thing I'd heard in the longest time. Not guilty, that means he's coming home.
And it means he's not a murderer.
That's right.
Most emotional of all, believe it or not, his attorney. You didn't think you were going to win.
Didn't know.
You've been in how many criminal trials?
A lot.
And yet you're getting emotional over this one.
Yeah.
How come?
Because I knew in my heart he was innocent. I knew it. The question was, could I prove it?
But prove it he did. The jury found that James Seville had been entrapped. Under Arizona law, that meant the jury believed that Seville never would have committed the crime unless the sheriff's office or their informant, Thomas Morgan, gave Seville the idea and convinced him to carry it out. It was a decisive verdict, and one that did not sit well with Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Sheriff Arpaio spoke to the local media immediately after the verdict. He adamantly denied that his department entrapped James Seville and said as far as he was concerned, Seville was guilty. But even though Sheriff Arpaio is usually one of the most accessible public figures you'll find, he declined our request for an interview about this case, in which a jury came to believe his department framed a young man in order to produce a high-profile arrest. Should this case have ever reached a courtroom?
It should have never occurred, period.
There may yet be another trial in this case. James Seville is suing the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and Sheriff Joe Arpaio himself for gross negligence and malicious prosecution, allegations the sheriff and his office deny. Seville, once considered the perp, now says he was the victim of a cagey informant and the sheriff's office itself.
Morgan, he's a criminal, He's expected to do it. But for the people who covered it up and sheltered him, and I think, maybe they're to blame, the ones that, made his plot work, who knew what he was doing, and just covered it up and called me a liar for all those years.
As we mentioned, we did ask for an interview with Sheriff Arpaio. He declined, citing James Seville's pending lawsuit. The sheriff was re-elected to his 4th term last November.
After that trial. So now here's my quick take on this. I believe that Seville was the victim. I mean, he went along with it, and the sheriff's department and Thomas Morgan should have still been in jail at the sheriff's department. And he known when it happened, he would have been out of office like that. And he declined all this. So we at least should believe who's telling the truth. And I do believe that Seville was telling the truth. He confessed to it. He confessed. He did confess. He confessed to all of it. Those audio recordings helped, and he was found out guilty. And the sheriff's like, well, I believe that he's guilty. We did not set him up. We didn't set him up. He was found guilty. The jury is lying, and we have audio evidence to prove it. Well, if he won that lawsuit, maybe it wouldn't be a trial. It'd just be an all-out war. A war that James Seville would win, and a war that he would also win. Coming up next, this young girl says that she was bitten by the neighbor's dog. She also says that his father went and got a gun and shot the dog. Did he go too far? It's the question for the jury and for the Dateline viewers, and also for you. So I'm going to post a question on here which is the same question that's going to be aired on, which is going to be on here. Did he go too far? And what would you do if you were in this scenario? I'm going to ask those questions during the show, so stay with us. She was playing in the backyard when it happened. A neighbor's dog suddenly attacked the little girl, leaving bite marks. What the father did led him in court and in the end of his career. So the question is, did he go too far? That's the question for the jury and tonight for you. During the break, I asked these 2 questions. Was Ken Cannon justified in killing the neighbor's dog? And the second question, what would you do if your daughter came home with bite marks and you had an argument with your neighbor about the dog, which in this case would be the neighbor's dog? I'll explain you those questions at the end of the first part. So here's our copy with a Dateline Court TV exclusive.
In the quiet town of Gainesville, Georgia last spring, Ken Cannon faced a dilemma, whether to trust authorities to protect his child from danger or take matters into his own hands. He put his trust in the law.
You thought the law was going to do what the law does and take care of it?
Sure. I had total trust in the system. I wouldn't believe anyone would just let the bomb sit there and wait for it to explode before they do anything about it.
It all started 11 days before with his wife's urgent call to 911.
My daughter got hurt and she's got blood everywhere. Okay. And how did she get hurt? I don't know. I can't get it out of her. It's something to do with the big dog in the backyard.
Ken Cannon's 9-year-old daughter Amber and her younger brother were playing out back, and Bud, the neighbor's German Shepherd Husky, was chained up to this tree in the middle of their shared backyard. One minute, Amber was skipping over and petting Bud like she had many times before. The next minute, the dog pounced on top of her and attacked. Linda Carpenter, the dog's owner, heard Amber's cries from her driveway.
I couldn't believe that Bud was biting her. It was such a shock. And I ran over, grabbed him by the collar, and pulled him off of her.
You had to yank him off of her?
And I pulled him off of her, yes, and told her to run.
Amber scrambled home, her face and clothing soaked with blood. Her mother, Renee, was trembling at the sight of her.
I was panicked.
I thought that I could handle just about anything. But seeing my child with all of that, it was just too much.
Renee didn't wait for the ambulance. She raced Amber to the hospital. Her head was cut open, bite marks across the top of her scalp, puncture wounds on her arm and chest. When Ken Cannon arrived at the hospital, he hardly recognized his little girl.
She had just blood all over her, just everywhere. If it would have got her rolled over and got her to her neck, it could have killed her very quickly.
Ken Cannon was beside his daughter at her hospital bed, holding her hand and trying to calm her. At one point, she asked her dad to do something for her.
She asked me to go home and kill the dog because she was scared of it.
And what did you say to her when she asked you that?
Well, I told her that I couldn't kill the dog because there were procedures in reference to calling animal control and that they were responsible to respond to it and come out and get the animal.
At that point, the Cannons were not worried. They were confident that animal control, less than a mile away, would come that night to remove the dog. In fact, the dog's owner, Linda Carpenter, had already called animal control, and they told her she could leave the dog chained up outside over the weekend, but she would have to bring it in on Monday so it could be checked for rabies. The Cannons didn't know that when they pulled into their driveway after a long night at the hospital, and they were shocked to see the dog still tied up out back. Amber was so terrified she wouldn't step out of the car.
She's just climbing back into the seat. She's afraid Buddy's going to be loose or get loose and come back after her. And basically, I had to just pick her up, hold her, and take her inside.
The next day, Ken got on the phone 3 different times with Animal Control 911, demanding the dog be removed and making threats. The first at 12:04 in the afternoon.
They should have came out after this dog. It's still tied up in my backyard, so I'm going to go out here and shoot it.
The next, about 40 minutes later at 12:46.
I'm a patient man, but my dog was 18 stitches and it's in her head, and the dog's sitting out in my backyard. I'm getting impatient.
And then at 12:59, the director of Animal Control called him back.
I'm just asking you, please, sir, let me come out there under these exact circumstances and just take the dog. Right.
Animal Control says it decides case by case whether to remove a dog immediately. Usually those cases involve death or severe injury. But the director told Ken that even though his daughter had been mauled, the law allows the dog to be temporarily quarantined at home as long as it's current on its rabies shots. Linda Carpenter assured Animal Control that her dog was vaccinated. Ken's disgust with the system was bubbling over. To make matters worse, his daughter was having horrible nightmares and wouldn't leave the house all weekend long.
She pretty much just slept in the bed with me. And she tried a couple times to take a nap in her room, and he would bark and it would scare her.
But Amber was relieved knowing it wouldn't go on too much longer. Linda Carpenter told the Cannons and Animal Control that once the dog left, it was never coming back.
I have a plan to have Bud euthanized.
Why was that one of the first thoughts you had? I'm going to have my dog put to sleep.
Because I would never own a dog that would bite a child.
Linda says she felt terrible about the attack, and she and Ken Cannon were not only neighbors, but good friends. They had known each other for 30 years. But days after the dog bite, things were different. There were no more neighborly chats. Linda and the Cannons were not speaking, and Amber was becoming more and more anxious, waiting for Bud to be picked up.
She kept asking when were they going to come and get him, and we told her on Monday.
And on Monday, Linda did take the dog to be checked for rabies, and it would be quarantined for the next 8 days. But despite Linda's promise to put Bud to sleep, Ken wasn't convinced that she would go through with it, and it looked like he may have been right. Just 11 days after the attack, Bud was back, tied up in the very same spot where he attacked Amber.
I was amazed. Linda told Amber, you'll never see that dog again, I promise. And I was not going to allow that dog to be there when Amber pulled up in the yard.
The dog had only been there for 10 minutes when Ken went in the house, got this automatic rifle, and with Bud in the crosshairs, he fired. Linda was on the phone when suddenly she heard the crack of gunfire and ran outside. She was shocked at what she saw.
Just seeing him lying there, dead.
you know, with the chain still around his neck. It wasn't like he was loose. He wasn't running. The fact that someone would have the heart to do something like that, to shoot a chained dog.
What did you lose that day?
I lost a friend.
And he was defenseless, right? I mean, there was nothing.
He was defenseless, yes.
Linda says she saw Ken calmly get into his truck and drive off.
This is an emergency. Somebody just shot my dog dead. That's what's right.
I couldn't believe he did it. I really couldn't believe that he would do something like that.
Linda says he especially should have known better. You see, Ken Cannon was more than just an ordinary parent. He was an 8-year veteran of the Gainesville Police Force. Now he'd be suspended from the force with pay. Officer Cannon spent his life defending the law. Now he faced criminal charges, cruelty to an animal, and illegally discharging a firearm. If convicted, he'd face up to 2 years in prison and the end of his professional career. So, was Officer Cannon a father protecting his daughter, or a hot-headed cop who took matters into his own hands? 5 months later, it would be up to a jury to decide.
I was acting as a parent. I was taking care of a problem, protecting.
Simple as that.
Sure.
What do you think? Was Ken Cannon justified in killing his neighbor's dog? You can log on right now and tell us at dateline.msnbc.com. When we come back, Officer Cannon heads to court.
So, the question is, was Ken Cannon justified in shooting the dog? That's a question for you folks watching live, as we continue to look into this story. So, when we come back, Officer Ken Cannon goes to court. The trial will last for months, and what you will decide. The question is still on the community for you folks out there watching, and also for you. So stay with us. Officer Ken Cannon is now going to court for shooting the neighbor's dog. And remember, he did so 11 days before all this. So was he justified in shooting the dog? You can still vote. You can still vote from the community, and for you guys watching out there live. The question's about to go in the hands of the jury. Once again, here's a little copy.
Prosecutors have painted him a canine vigilante.
Of all people, a police officer should know better than to take
Will he go out and do this again?
As Officer Cannon's trial approached 5 months later, everyone seemed to have an opinion. The morning paper was filled with editorials, some calling Ken the loose cannon, a man with no self-control, a trigger-happy cop. Gainesville Times editorial page editor Rick Parnham says no other story last year provoked such a gut-level response.
People don't like what they viewed as the Wild West mentality. And people say, well, how can we have an officer of the law, a police officer, basically take the law into his own hands?
But was Officer Cannon some kind of lawless cowboy who deserved to be punished for what he did? Or was he justified in killing his neighbor's dog and therefore should walk free?
Please be seated.
As the trial got underway, the prosecutor seemed to have an airtight case. Not just a witness and physical evidence, but a flat-out admission from the man himself.
You killed Bud, correct?
I killed him.
You did nothing other than go get your gun and shoot that dog.
That's exactly what I did, Larry.
Officer Cannon was not apologizing. He says he was protecting his family and the community from a dangerous animal. But the prosecutor would argue that at the time Bud was shot, no one was in harm's way. In fact, Officer Cannon's family wasn't even in the state at the time.
Unless that dog sprout wings and flew to Mississippi, it was not going to attack your family that afternoon, was it?
That's correct.
And if that wasn't enough, the prosecutor had another powerful piece of evidence, that damaging taped conversation to animal control.
That should have came out after this dog. It's still tied up in my backyard, so I'm going to go out here and shoot it.
When you said to dispatch, hey, that dog's still tied up out there, I'm going to go out back and shoot that dog. It sounds like a threat.
Yeah, it was.
It was intended to be a threat.
Sure. I thought it might give them a little bit of intensity to do something, yeah.
And there was something else. The prosecution argued Officer Cannon never bothered to look into the most obvious option. he never knocked on Linda Carpenter's door to ask why the dog was back.
You didn't bother to find out. I didn't care. You didn't care.
You didn't care?
She made her decision.
Crazy?
And you made yours. That's correct, I did.
And Linda Carpenter said if he had asked, she would have told him that Bud was going to be euthanized the very next day. She said she brought him home for one last meal.
I felt sorry for him. They told me up at the vet that he hadn't eaten very well, and I took him home to take him out in the backyard to feed him.
And did you feed him?
Yes, sir.
And did you give him some water?
Yes, sir.
All right, sir. Have a good day.
And most importantly, the prosecution argued, Animal Control explained to Officer Cannon the lengthy procedure the agency needed to follow in dealing with a dog bite.
I explained to him briefly, not in detail as I have previously here, what the process would entail.
Hall County Animal Control.
In fact, the process required several steps, an investigation, paperwork, hearings. It could all take weeks in order to officially declare the dog dangerous. And then, if it was declared dangerous, it would ultimately be up to Linda Carpenter to either euthanize her dog or keep it in an enclosed pen on her property. The prosecutor said Officer Cannon knew the process was getting underway.
You as a police officer know that sometimes the wheels of justice move slowly.
Sure.
But do you think it's fair then that if government doesn't do what it's supposed to do, then it's up to us to go out there and just do what we think is right, to take the law into our own hands?
I believe each and every person has to be responsible in protecting their family and their community. And if it's so be it that they have to shoot an animal, then shoot it.
Officer Cannon knew the law. He broke the law.
Okay.
But to defense attorney Dan Summer, that didn't make him a guilty man.
In this country, you're allowed to break the law if you're justified.
Officer Cannon's defense would be built not on who done it, but why.
In my heart, I knew he hadn't done anything wrong. He did what any God-fearing, decent parent would have done, and that is eliminate the threat to his child.
The defense first called Officer Cannon's daughter, Amber, to the stand.
He bit me on my arm and my chest, the back of my shoulder, and across my head.
Amber testified she lived not only with the physical scars, but the long-lasting emotional scars as well.
You had a dream the dog got loose?
Yes, I did.
And what happened when the dog got loose?
He had killed me.
This is a justification defense.
The defense set out to show that Officer Cannon was not a violent, angry man, simply a concerned and loving father, afraid the dog would attack again, and that he shot only as a last resort.
Now, let me ask you this, Officer Cannon. First of all, are you proud that you shot the dog?
Not proud, no.
Are you ashamed that you shot the dog?
No, I'm not ashamed.
All right.
I felt as though it was a ticking bomb. I felt as though that could go off at any time, and I felt I had a responsibility to act.
The defense said the dog was an immediate threat tied up out back, even with Officer Cannon's family away from home. There were other children in the area, and Linda Carpenter, the dog's owner, never warned anyone he could snap.
There were no fences?
No, sir.
Did you have a sign up that said, warning, dangerous dog?
No, sir.
Is there anything that would have put anybody on notice, whether it be man, woman, or child, that Bud was there and could make physical contact with that person?
No, sir. There was nothing up.
And about that phone call to Animal Control played earlier in court,
He says, they need to come out here and deal with it. I'm going to deal with it. I'm not going to leave it out here with my children.
the defense attorney argued it was nothing more than a cry for help, begging someone to get rid of the dog. As for talking to Linda Carpenter, there seemed to be no use in that, the defense said. They said it was obvious how she felt when she brought the dog back home.
You saw that as what, a slap in the face?
No, I didn't take it personal, but I took it as though she didn't care about my children.
The defense attorney was about to turn the tables. He said the wrong person was on trial. It wasn't his client, Officer Cannon, who was to blame, but the government agency, Animal Control, for doing nothing, and Linda Carpenter, the dog's owner, for bringing the dog back. Animal Control Officer Rick Phillips took the stand and acknowledged he didn't respond quickly after Amber was mauled on Friday.
So, all of Saturday and Sunday and half of Monday, there was a danger to the public out there on Georgia Avenue, wasn't there? I dog had bitten someone? Yes, sir.
All right. Did it concern you as the head animal control officer that a dog that had bitten a child was
yes, sir.
in a yard?
Yes, sir.
Not confined,
yes,
simply
sir.
restrained?
Yes, sir.
And you did nothing, did you, Officer Phillips?
I did what I believe was what I am allowed to do within the limits of the law at this time, sir.
But 11 days after his daughter's attack, Officer Cannon saw no sign that anyone was going to do anything fast enough. After all, Bud was tied up, same chain, same tree, same spot. At this point, the defense said it was understandable that Officer Cannon would run out of patience.
Here's a guy that exercised, in my opinion, enormous restraint. Most people, like myself, I would have shot the dog that night. End of discussion. But Ken, because he's a trained police officer, tried to do the right thing until it was evident at the very end that he wasn't going to get any help from anybody. The check wasn't in the mail. They've got the wrong person on trial, folks.
In closing arguments, the defense attorney slammed animal control and then directly addressed Linda Carpenter.
And how dare they come in here and ask you to convict this man when that woman has done what she has done? Let her stare at me all day long. That's just fine, Miss Carpenter. That is unconscionable.
You made Linda Carpenter out to be the bad guy.
She was the bad guy. There's absolutely no way in the world that any decent human being is going to put the welfare of an animal over the health and safety of a child. End of discussion.
Would the jurors see it the same way? After 4 days of testimony, Officer Cannon's fate rested in their hands, and they would do something no one expected.
So who's on trial here? Animal control? Linda Carpenter? Or Ken Cannon? The conclusion to the story, plus how you voted when we return. Stay with us. So, if convicted, Officer Ken Cannon would be justified, would be sentenced to 2 years in prison at the end of his force. So did he go too far? Over 70% say he was justified, while 27% said it was unjustified. So would jurors see the same way? Here with the conclusion of the story, hold a copy.
Time. Nobody said anything in the beginning that I recall. We just sat there for a minute looking at each other.
The jurors started their deliberations. Before them, the task of deciding whether or not Officer Cannon was justified in shooting his neighbor's dog. We sat down with 3 of the 6 jurors.
Any dog lovers in the group?
The jurors listened to the evidence. They were particularly disturbed because the officer shot the dog while he was chained up with nowhere to go.
I thought it was cruel. I mean, I would never think about shooting a dog.
I was frustrated that the dog was there and chained up and somewhat innocent. I mean, he didn't have any choices in the matter. Then there was no warning except that the dog was shot.
But they also believed Officer Cannon was acting on instinct as a father.
You know, if it was my daughter and she was wanting me to do something about what happened to her, then I can understand his frame of mind. Then to hear that she had been tossed around like a rag doll really got me.
But weren't there other options? What about walking up to Linda Carpenter's door, ringing the doorbell and saying, "What is going on?"
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that sort of the more rational thing to do?
It would be, but it seemed he was so angry and their communication was so broke down, him and Miss Carpenter at that point.
Ken Cannon's attorney did something that some would say is clever. He took this trial and flipped it. Here's the guy who's on trial, who admits he shot a dog, and Ken Cannon's attorney says, you know who the bad guys are? Linda Carpenter and Animal Control. How effective was his approach?
Very effective. Very, very effective. He kept the jurors educated on the case, more so, I felt, than the prosecution did.
And the jurors did not buy Linda Carpenter's story.
I told her that I would have the dog euthanized after the quarantine was over.
Did you believe Linda Carpenter when she said, I was going to put that dog to sleep?
No.
No?
No.
No. 3 no's.
I could see that she was a dog lover, and, if it was my dog, I mean, I wouldn't want to put it to sleep either. And I think she was thinking about that first, more so than the safety of the kids.
And they all agree putting the dog back in the yard again was a serious mistake.
I mean, what was going on in her head? To bring back that dog? I mean, it's just common sense.
My heart went out to her because I kind of felt sorry that she was alone, without her dog. But at the same time, it was like, you really could have prevented this.
But with all their considerations, the jury said it all came down to that central question raised by the defense.
All I could hear in my mind was he justified? Was he justified? Was it a dangerous dog?
All right, you may publish the verdict.
After more than 3 hours, they reached a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant as to count 1, not guilty. As to count 2, not guilty.
The trial would have been over then and there, but the jurors were about to do something extremely rare. They asked the judge if they could speak, and when they did, out of the camera's view, they wagged their finger at animal control, and especially at Linda Carpenter, suggesting she should be punished for what they say was her role in the shooting.
The owner of the dog never really received any reprimand, citation.
That was sweet. Very sweet vindication.
Because that told you they understood your case, they believed everything you said, they believed in Ken Cannon.
Absolutely.
It was a big sigh of relief for the Cannon family. But on her way out of the courtroom, Linda Carpenter could not believe she was the one being condemned when someone else was on trial.
What did I do? I have not done anything. Why should I be prosecuted? Ken took the law into his own hands. He was judge, jury, and executioner of my dog.
81 right here, 29 check.
But back on the police force days after the trial, Officer Cannon says he was prepared to lose everything in order to defend what he believed in.
I believe that we have to protect our families, even if it means answering for something that may be in question. And I will, to the day I die, with my family. And I would hope anyone would do the same for their children.
Officer Cannon says he plans to take legal action against the county and the city. He says they failed to protect him and his family.
So here's my take for you guys watching, and for you guys watching live. I'm a dog lover. I mean, I got my niece has like 2 dogs, and if they bit me, I want to go out. I want to go out and go shoot them. I would question them. I would question my sister-in-law. I want to go get my dog and be put on trial. Hear me? The steps have to be taken. I'm controlling this and this. So, yeah, I'm very glad that this case is over. I'm glad that he's doing the right. He did the right thing. So, did he do the right thing? I guess he did. You may have different opinions about this, but I think that he did the right thing. He did what his gut told him to do. Because he was angry and frustrated. Miscommunication. I'm glad that Linda Carpenter was put on trial. And also animal control. But there ain't no question about it. Ain't no issue about it either. So that's it for now. I'll see you guys next time for another interactive story. And coming up on Give Me a Break Friday, a story of forbidden love. I'll give you a preview when we return. Here's a preview of Friday's show.
She was young, beautiful, and naive.
She was like a little angel.
A child of the modern world, expected to follow an ancient tradition, an arranged marriage. But she was already in love with someone else.
They were actually married in secret.
Right.
Soon the secret came out. Her family's code of honor violated.
They were all yelling at her, pointing their finger at her.
The young bride refused to give up her groom.
That's when the family started making things really bad for her.
Their love would cost her life. But did her own family really order her killed? They deny it, but that's what police overseas say. So why haven't they even been questioned?
Can't believe that they're walking around like nothing even happened.
Will a young bride's murder go unpunished?
I'm Bob McEwen from Dateline NBC. Could we ask you some questions about Jassie's murder?
Tonight, Forbidden Love, a Dateline special.
That's on Friday. That's Give Me a Break for Wednesday. We'll see you again for Give Me a Break Friday. I hope you all had a great day. For all of us at YouTube and Give Me a Break. Good night, everyone.